Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
So we, this morning, are in Parshat Emor. We're going to look at the text in just a minute, but first I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're going to do. What we're going to do, we're going to nerd out. We're going to completely geek out today. So those of you who are happy about that, this is going to be a very good day. For those of you who don't like geeking out, you can just enjoy the muffins if you're here and enjoy each other's company. If you're at home, we'll just all be together and you can just watch people geek out who love it. Okay. So the reason we're going to geek out is because this Parsha is super. Yes, I said it. It's really boring. It is read a lot more than on the Shabbat that we read it, the Shabbat. It is read every time we have a holiday. So this is the liturgical calendar. So all of us who've studied the liturgical calendar are just like, right? So we get a little BORED. So we've talked lots of aspects of Emor because I've taught it here for 13 years, and also because whenever we have a holiday and we're doing Torah around a holiday, we talk about Emor. So we've done lots of different ways in. Today we're going to do a completely different thing. We're going to take one little piece of Emor, one tiny little piece about the holiday of Sukkot, and we're going to use it to illustrate what we've kind of been talking about in terms of the author of Leviticus, the priestly author, and the holiness school, and the complications around trying to date this material. So that's what we're going to dive into. So I don't want you fretting or worrying or taking too many notes about, whatever the details are about what I'm going to say. If you want to get all that information down, terrific. However, what's important is that you leave here a little confused. That is really important, because then I have achieved my goal of exposing us to how difficult it is to parse and to date and to assign the sources that come together in the final redaction, or even to understand what the practices were in ancient Israel. George Walken, you shouldn't think that your gifts to me go unattended to. Much of this class is the fault of George Walken, who gave me, and he continues to give me generously, his copies of Biblical Archaeology Review. So a respected, peer-reviewed, journal about the archaeology of the land of Israel and how it pertains often to, the biblical text. So I was caught in an article. I've been caught in this article for a few months because it's very confusing for me too. But as I was chewing on this article for the last few weeks, I come to these articles about Sukkot, partly from the book that I've been reading, as you know, The Sanctuary of Silence by Israel Knoll. So I'm reading Knoll, I'm reading this, and all of a sudden things come together, which is unfortunate for y'all, in my brain, so that a shiur has been produced around kind of what all this means. So the article that I was reading in BAR, I've excerpted a quote from it, but it's a really interesting piece, obviously, if I'm chewing on it that long, about the origins, really. It's called The Genesis of Judaism. So the Genesis of Judaism is about when was Judaism actually practiced in the land of Israel? When were things like Shabbat, Kashrut, building Sukkot on Sukkot? When were these things, not eating certain kinds of fish, not using images on anything? When was Judaism, as kind of we understand the basics of it, that we have in Torah, when did it start to be observed? You're going to be shocked at both what this article says, what Knoll says, and what much of the scholarship today says about the answer to that question. You're going to be shocked. I was shocked. Because the answer is not in the First Temple period.
What?
Thank you, Laura Diamond, for the appropriate audience response to that setup. So So we're going to walk through it a little bit. It's like I said, it's okay to be confused. It is confusing. I don't want to just leave you with a tangle of stuff, so we'll parse it as much as you want. So using the sanctuary of silence, the genesis of Judaism, and then some research into the actual holiday of Sukkot, we're going to look at why this is so complex and so complicated. And then where we wind up. And I just want to correct something I said last time. Last time I said that there is a debate about an early P and a late P, and that I'm a proponent of the early P argument. That was an oversimplification. The argument is, did P start early and keep going, or did P start late? There's no argument that P went on for a while, right? That there's additions to P, unless you believe the Holiness Code came first, which some scholars do. Some scholars say the Holiness Code came first, then P adds on to it. But most people, I would say, think the other way, that like Knoll, the priestly Torah comes first, then the Holiness Code is added at the crisis of the 8th century. Those of us who are proponents of an early P are not suggesting P was early, H is over here, and there's nothing in between. P continues to be a dynamic thread that goes for a long time. So I believe that a lot of the original material of P is early. Then it gets redacted. It gets added to, it gets amended, it gets whatever until it's completely changed by the response of the Holiness Code, right? The whole turmoil and change within Israel, and within finally the response of the priesthood to what's happening to regular Israelites. In the priestly Torah, this is not the Holiness Code. In the priestly Torah, there is no real concern with Israel. There's no real concern with Israelites. It's all about the cult. That is the only thing there is in P. P does not care about how Israelites treat each other so much, if at all. There's no folk customs. There's nothing about how the people observed the holiday. It was all about the sacrifices. How many? When were they offered? How were they to be offered? It was all about the priests fulfilling the word. This was what was important. The priests fulfilling the word of God. Therefore, the will of God, period. Not for better crops, not for rain, not for any reward, just because God said so, and just out of awe of the power of the holy, the power of the divine. That is the relationship between priests and the divine. They don't care about the people. Okay. There's much scholarship to suggest that, and actually in the first temple, they withdraw even further. The priests really withdraw into the walls of the temple and are completely unconcerned with what's happening outside the walls of the temple. H brings in all of the popular worship of the people. Okay? So H cares a lot about what's going on for the people, because H is trying to address the needs of the people and to give them ways to bolster and to honor and to include the ways that they celebrate the holidays, right? As they start to try to address the reality of 8th century BCE Israelite society. Okay. That's where we're starting. Okay. So, all right. So let's look at Leviticus 23. This is Parshat Emor. Leviticus 23. We're talking about the calendar here. So Leviticus 23:1. And Leviticus 23 is the place where scholars go, part of where they start to go to figure out what is up with how we understand how the Israelites understood holidays. All right. By Deber on Moshe Emor, something new and different, right? God says to Moshe, saying, Daber b'nei Yisrael v'amarta alehem moadei Adonai asher tikru'u otam mikra'ei kodesh elehem moadai. Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, these are the times that you shall declare, these, proclaimed times that are kodesh. These are what they are. This is H. This is H. Very important. This is not P. Sheshet yamim ta'aseh melacha v'yom hashvi'i shabbat shabbaton mikra kodesh. So Sheshet yamim, 6 days shall you work. On the 7th day, Shabbat Shabbaton. This is not in P. P doesn't care about Shabbos. All P cares about Shabbos is there's an extra offering. Zeu. That's it. That's all we hear in P. This is H. Y'all shall work 6 days, and on the 7th day it is Shabbat. Kol melacha lo ta'asu. All y'all's work you will not do. There is none of that in P. Ele moedei Adonai mikra kodesh. Here are the set times that will be called kodesh. They will be proclaimed kodesh, right? B'chodesh harishon, in the first month, on the 14th day of the first month. What is it? Pesach. This is nowhere in P. The unleavened bread is nowhere in P. Chag HaMatzot, nowhere in P. Only the Pesach offering. And we're not even sure the Pesach offering, I think, now that I think about it, is not P. It was a popular thing. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, there shall be a Pesach at twilight to God. And on the 15th day, Chag HaMatzot, a 7-day Chag, a festival for God. Matzot tochelu, only matzot, only unleavened bread will you eat. We are in what month of the year? The first month of the year. Pesach is in the first month of the year. Chag HaAviv, so this is the spring festival. It is the month of Nisan. Nisan. Bayom HaRishon, Bayom HaRishon Mikra Kodesh, on the first day, it'll be a sacred occasion. No work is done. Vayikra ishel Adonai shiv'at yamim. You will make fire offerings to God. So H still cares that the cultic stuff be done right. So on the 7th day, you'll also have a sacred occasion, and you will not do any work. Moshe speaks to God says to Moshe, talk to the people and tell them, when you enter the land that I'm going to give you and you reap its harvest, you shall bring the first sheaf of your harvest to the priest. He shall elevate the sheaf before Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh for acceptance on your behalf. The priest shall elevate it on the day after the Sabbath. On the day that you elevate the sheaf, you shall offer as a burnt offering to God a lamb of the first year without blemish. The meal offering, the offering of fire of pleasing odor to God, and the libation of wine, a quarter of a hin. Until that very day, until you've brought the offering of your God, you shall eat no bread or parched grain or fresh ears. It is a law for all time throughout the ages in your settlements. Notice, no date. When you reap your harvest, that's the date. That will change depending on conditions. Exactly right. Until that very day. And from the day on which you bring the sheaf of elevation offering, the day after the Sabbath, you shall count off 7 weeks. So there's no date for Shavuot. Shavuot will completely depend on your harvest. When you harvest, you bring your first sheaf, then you count from the Shabbat, the day after the Shabbat. There's lots of rabbinic arguing about what exactly does this mean. Which Shabbat? So there's a whole argument about it. You shall bring from your settlements 2 loaves of bread as an elevation. Each shall be made of 2/10 of a measure of choice flour, baked after leavening as first fruits to God. With the bread you shall present as a burnt offering 7 yearly lambs without blemish, 1 bull of the herd, and 2 rams, with their meal offerings and libations, an offering by fire of pleasing odor to God. Right? Reach nichoach. This is God's part of the feast. You shall offer a he-goat as a sin offering and 2 yearling lambs as a sacrifice of well-being. The priest shall elevate these 2 lambs together with the bread of first fruits as an elevation offering before Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. They shall be holy to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh for the priest. This is how we feed the priesthood. On the same day you shall hold a celebration. It shall be a sacred occasion for you. You shall not work at your occupations. This is a law for all time in your settlements throughout your ages. And when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God. Now we understand a little more, having looked into H, why that's here, right? That kind of looks like it came in out of nowhere. Like, why is that here all of a sudden? Because H is super concerned with the fact that the poor are starving. So here's your festival. Here's what you're going to do. Here's the cult stuff you have to do. Do not forget when you harvest that you harvest in such a way that the folks who are suffering are given access to agricultural produce.
Can I just clarify, because I'm about maybe laugh for a second. So in terms of when this is written, it's like there's the holiness post people, they're like editing it in, because you've got all the ritual stuff, the priestly stuff is there about do it this way and do it that way. And then also write in a line about is that happening? You're saying it's being written by different people, but combined, or is this?
So we have P, which stands alone. Okay. We have standalone P. Then we have H taking from P and adding other components, sometimes not even taking P.
And that's, I think what I'm getting confused at is thinking about H and P and then thinking about, well, is this Leviticus? Is this which one did they write? Which book?
So in Leviticus, we have two sources. We have P and we have H. The second half of Leviticus is H. This is H.
Five written sources. P, H.
Yeah. So H is another source. Yes. And there's lots of ways to do it so that there's 7 or 8 sources.
Do these same sources carry through all the books, or is it just Leviticus that?
Funny you should ask.
Identify those.
Here is a visual. Ooh. All right. Did everyone see this? This beautiful.
Hey.
All right. We're only concerned, and in this case, with Genesis through Numbers. Why? Because D is its own source. So it doesn't matter. D doesn't have anything to do with the rest of it. All right. So, no, there's no H, right? So P is not broken up here into H and P. So poor David trying to do his job and getting chased out. Okay. Yeah. All right. So let me explain the chart. So hopefully it's a little self-explanatory. So you have J, which is your red source. E is your green source. P is the blue. R is your final redactor. The final person to answer part, this is why it's part of your question too, is there's somebody who edits the entire thing late. We're going to see how late some of this might be.
Can you add the timeline? Because obviously the H and the P are not working simultaneously. They're working one after the other. So what's the sequence here? I guess that.
So if you chop the big blue thing of Leviticus in half of it would be later. P is earlier than H, if you buy Knoll's argument.
So who's the oldest? The oldest are these guys, right?
The oldest are J and E. J and E are combined. P edits J and E. So look at your Genesis to Exodus. Do you see that part of the chart? Notice there's a lot of red, a lot of green, and intermittent all the way through Genesis and Exodus. What are there? Blue stripes. The blue stripes is P editing the JE material. So every time a JE story ends with a genealogy, that's P, right? So Judah and Tamar, that story ends with Tamar giving birth to twins, and Peretz begets blah, 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 begets blah, 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 and finally begets David, right? That is P putting P's gloss on. So P is an early redactor. P is not only its own source, it's also an early redactor of the JE material. There's a priestly agenda with the JE material. J, most likely a Southern source. E concerned with what's going on in the north. Those are brought together probably around the time of the founding of the United Kingdom, because you have to bring those stories together for a national story. Then P has an agenda about editing those materials. Okay, already I see hands. What's happening?
Sorry.
All right, hang on.
Sorry.
H is half of P. Look at the blue, Leviticus. Split that in half. The later half of that blue is H. It's not on the chart. But if Leviticus goes from chapter 1 to chapter whatever, chapter 20 something, chapter 19 of Leviticus starts H, right? So down the middle, right down the middle of that blue chunk is where H begins.
If you didn't know about H, you'd think the priest did everything.
Correct. You would think Leviticus was only P. Right. And it's not true. It is a priestly school that's writing all of Leviticus. But what we know now, or what some of us accept, is, and it's largely accepted, is that there's two different priestly schools, because you can look at their theology and see that P doesn't care at all about anything outside the cult. Nothing.
Sorry, are P and H simultaneous?
No, they're not simultaneous.
So you're telling me, because you're just ruining the priests for because I always thought that they had social conscience and that they're just these kind of nuclear scientists working inside the power plant.
That's what they are.
Care less.
That's what they are.
And are H priestly or?
H are priests who get it that the world is falling apart out there.
Okay.
And they have to respond. That they are listening to the critics who are the prophets. The prophets come after P. H is responding. If you buy my argument that I base on people, whatever, then H is responding to the prophets as priests, and they bring in a lot of the popular non-cultic practices around the holidays as part of their Torah.
What's new to me in this chart is the big role of the redactor in Numbers.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought redactor meant they cut and paste.
Right.
But the implication, what I'm seeing there, is that they actually created a lot of material.
Correct.
Meaning some group of people, presumably, actually didn't just cut and paste, they created new stuff.
Yes. And often there's a hunt for where did they get it, right? There are chunks of that redactor that were like, where did that come from? That came from some source that we've lost. Because they probably weren't writing a whole bunch of it, but they were taking other sources and adding it in. But what are their sources? And many of them we have lost.
It seems to me that a lot of this intrusion or additional material is seeking balance between the people and the theory.
For H, yes.
That's what I mean.
For H, yes. That's the agenda.
And so it's added when he feels perhaps that there was too much emphasis on the ritual and not enough emphasis on what was happening in the culture.
Correct. So that's what they're responding to. Correct. They are balancing out and doing a combination of both and.
Okay, so it seems like there's a whole lot of reconciling going on. You said that the J
What did I do?
From the north?
The what? J is from the south.
South. And the E is from the north.
Correct.
So we've got a physical situation going on. There's conflict, it suggests. And that's being reconciled by the P?
No. There's not that there's conflict. They are different. They are different tribes. They're different cultures who have different native stories. They have different founding mythologies.
So still stuff has to be reconciled to pull this
So it has to be somehow put together, integrated, but the seams are very clear. He did not erase any of the seams that it makes it clear that this is a different story than that one.
But they're still trying to address the same issues raised by the early J and E.
They don't really care about J and E. He doesn't care about what J and E care about. J and E have God being a character, walking around, appearing in dreams, horror to P, but you can't get rid of it. So what do? You make what's important about it. You put on a genealogy that proves this story that we don't care about at all results in the line that comes down to Aaron.
So many.
For the P author, it's got to come to Aaron. But there is a clan that is in tension with the Aaronid clan, and that's the Mushite clan, who everything comes down to Moses. So you have the Aaronids and the Mushites. They are in tension, and you can see that all over Torah, where it lifts up Aaron and everything results in Aaron, or it's about Moshe and everything comes to Moshe. There's tension there. All right. One more. And then we're going to try to. yeah. I was afraid of that. But it's okay. I mean, I kind of knew we were going to geek out. So it's okay.
It's probably something you've addressed in the past, but since I wasn't part of this group, is there any identification of these different authors?
Most likely, these are schools of thought. These are not authors. They're not writing. Let's sit down and let's see. There's once a king named, they are taking the popular mythology and putting it in some kind of probably oral form. It was oral. And then at some point it gets kind of codified. Like, this is how we tell the story. Once it gets written down, it gets passed on through the scribal tradition of this is how we tell that story.
It would be a group effort.
It would be a group effort. It would be like, no. He had red hair. No, he didn't. He was a brunette. Like, come on. Like, and then some version of that becomes, what do you call it? Dominant, becomes set as that's how it is. But, Esav had red hair. No, Jacob was the one with red, there's different versions of it. And then one finally gets set down. And once it's written, now it's really codified. It becomes the canon, right? That's the version of the story that gets canonized, right? Okay.
I'm not sure how to ask this, but talking about the different groups that are being part of all of this, is there a group that's just the people of the neighborhood, so to speak, that are putting their thoughts into all of this, or do they make up their own?
So probably J and E are the people's stories. Okay. But somebody decides what version is going to be written down. And then the people continue to tell other stories, not just these. Right? We think a lot of Isaac material was lost. Right? Isaac, there's hardly anything about Isaac in Torah. We think the folks who had Isaac as their progenitor, as their mythic ancestor, that group died off and had very little power at the time that these stories were being codified, because they just didn't make it. The Isaac material didn't make it into the canon. So they'd already kind of lost influence.
So the neighbors sort of were lost.
Yes, for the Isaac neighbors, kind of
Isaac neighbors
fizzled, and their stuff didn't make it. Yeah, I know. Yeah, we feel bad. Okay. We good? We're good. Okay. So we're going to get to our, everybody okay at home? You all okay? You all right? All right. Everybody's good. Okay.
You blew their mind.
I worry about my people. Look at that picture of Ellie and fibroid I found. Oh, so sweet. Okay. Where am I going? I'm going to Leviticus. All right. Blah, 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 blah. Where's our... Here, there we were just at the edges of the field. Speak to the Israelite people thus. In the seventh month, on the first day of the month, you shall observe complete rest, a sacred occasion commemorated with loud blasts. This is a tradition, a folk tradition of the people, that on the seventh month, on the first day of the seventh month, kind of proclaiming it, the seventh month is here, we blow a loud blast. And that's, by the way, P.S., that's it. That's all that's written about that holiday. That's it. Zeu. That's it. Some folk tradition that the 7th month, on the first day of that month, you blow a commemorating blast. Zil. That's it. You shall not work at your occupations. God says, mark the 10th day of this 7th month is the Day of Atonement. It shall be a sacred occasion for you. You shall practice self-denial and bring an offering of fire. All right, so you're supposed to bring an offering. Okay, so this goes back to when there were lots of shrines, and clearly the people brought an offering to their local shrine on the 10th day of the 7th month. And they were supposed to practice self-denial. What the heck does that mean? We don't know. It is the Day of Atonement on which expiation is made on your behalf before Yud Hey Vav Hey. So some kind of national forgiveness day. Okay. Indeed, any person who does not practice self-denial throughout that day shall be cut off from kin. And whoever does any work throughout that day, I will cause that person to perish from among the people. Do no work whatever, for it is a law for all time throughout the ages in all your settlements. It shall be Shabbat Shabbaton, a Sabbath of complete rest, and you shall practice self-denial on the 9th day of the month at evening. From evening to evening, you shall observe this, your Shabbat. Right? So Kol Nidre nights to sundown the next day. Right here. And that's it. That's it. Sacrifice. Bring a sacrifice. Exactly. Nothing about fasting. Nothing. 7th month. So the rabbis have to figure out, what does this mean since we can't bring a sacrifice and we don't have a temple to make expiation on our behalf? How can we observe this? The only thing we can do is what's left. Push down your souls. They didn't have soul, but push down yourself. Okay. What does that mean? And the rabbis decide what it means. No eating, no drinking, no anointing, no sexual relations, right? So the rabbis decide, no wearing leather, right? So they decide what the things are that means initem et nafshotechem. Now, of course, they come up with lots of proof texts about it. They're not saying they're making that up, right? God forbid. They come up with lots of proof texts about when you see initem, this verb, that has something to do with fasting. Okay.
Same with the Pesach. It was
Yep.
The Pesach was just you'll have matzah for a week.
Exactly.
Where's the whole story about Pharaoh?
Oh yeah. Exactly right. Okay. So we could do what we're going to do with lots of the holidays. Sukkot's just pretty clear, or it jumped out at me or whatever, but we could do it with Pesach. The same thing I'm going to do with Sukkot, we could do with Pesach. Like, where's the whole Pharaoh there? Like, what, excuse me? Like, what happened? All right. So here we go. Here's what we're going to be looking at. Say to the Israelite people, on the 15th day of this 7th month, there shall be Chag HaSukkot, the Feast of Booths, to Yud Hey Vav Hey, to last 7 days. Okay, what does that mean? What is the Feast of Booths? Well, let's see. The first day shall be a sacred occasion. You shall not work at your occupations. Okay, so first day is Yom Tov. 7 days you shall bring offerings by fire to God. On the 8th day, you shall observe Yom Tov and bring an offering of fire to God. It is a solemn gathering. You shall not work at your occupations. That's it. Those are the set times of God that you shall celebrate. What's missing?
Decorate your thing.
Get a paper chain that goes around the temple at least once. That's how we did it in Duluth. So that's it. That's H.
I like that.
Right? Hey, look, I would love Rosh Hashanah to be, let's just blow a shofar.
No worries.
Right. You don't have to write 2 sermons. Don't worry about it. Right? Where does it say? And you will have a machzor that is this big that contains the following liturgy. All right. So here's my very technical sheet on this. What's up with the biblical Sukkot? Because it's a little confusing. If you just look at H and you look at P, it's like Feast of Booths. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Feast of Booths. Yeah, but so you bring your sacrifice. Great. We get P's very concerned about that. The priestly school, even H is going to be concerned about doing that right. And then you don't work. Zehu. That's it. That's all that's written about the 7th month business. We have the first day of that month, the 10th day of that month, and the 14th day of that month. And it's not, of course, the beginning of the year. It's the 7th month, which confuses people every year when I read that in shul. Every year.
Which month is the beginning of Pesach? Does that mean that's the start of the new year?
Correct. Exactly.
That's news. That's news for me.
News. Okay, good.
Why is it called Rosh?
I'm glad, Jim. Huh?
I see called Rosh the head of the year.
That is not biblical. That is rabbinic. Rosh Hashanah is not biblical. People's minds are getting blown. This is what I love about Torah study. All the time. All the job security. Exactly right. Blow their minds. Okay. So let's look at Exodus. So if we go in our heads, go back to the chart, right? In your mind, go back to the chart, the colored chart, and the colored chart you just put it up there, Amy. So there's Exodus. Look at Exodus. A lot of E material, but a whole bunch of P. A whole bunch of P. So then the scholars have to figure out, well, which is P? Right? Like, what's P about E? Right? So that's some work to do. But there's a lot of P in Exodus. So let's look at this. And the feast of the harvest of the first fruits of your work, of what you sow in the field, and the feast of ingathering at the end of the year, when you gather in the results of your work from the field. This is what we just read, if you can believe it. This is Sukkot. How does Exodus understand it? It's a harvest, right? The first fruits, there's a harvest. What's that? That is most likely Pesach. Your first crop after the winter is the spring, is Pesach. Then the feast that they're calling it here, Chag HaAsif, the festival of gathering in the results of your work all during the solar year. The results of your work of the whole year of growing. That is your final harvest. The festival of ingathering. So that's it. Okay. Exodus says you have one at that harvest, one at that harvest. These are probably very old, rooted in Canaanite pagan celebrations. It's an old source. Solar calendar, has a lot to do with also the lunar calendar, but yeah. Okay. Meaning they're not separate. We tend to think of them as very separate, and they weren't. They were rectified. They were understood in relationship to each other. But the months go by the moon. All right. Let's look at numbers. All right. Let's go back to our chart. Who's in numbers again? Oh yeah. Some E, a lot of P, and as pointed out by Goran over there, a lot of R. Okay. That's who's right. That's who's involved in numbers. E. Oh, what I do? E and what I say? E and P. A little bit of J, but not so much. And R. All right. So let's look at what happens in numbers. On the 15th day of the 7th month, you shall observe a sacred occasion. You shall not work at your occupations. Okay. This sounds a little familiar, right? 7 days shall you observe a festival to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. You shall present a burnt offering, an offering by fire, a pleasing odor to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Okay. P, right? All over the place. What P is concerned about, right? 13 bulls of the herd, in case you were wondering. 2 rams, 14 yearling lambs. They shall be without blemish. The meal offerings, blah, 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 blah. And there shall be 1 goat for a sin offering, in addition to the regular burnt offering, its meal offering, and libation. So, that's it. Sacrifices and not working. Yes.
Sorry, if there was a chart, starting with Book of Joshua and Jonah, like, would it just all be E basically from then on?
If what happened?
If there was, let's say we went past the 5 books here, and then we drew these nice pictures for, starting with the Book of Joshua and then
that's
Judges
D.
and King. It would just all be pink or so, whatever color we choose for E, right?
No, from Deuteronomy through like Kings 2, that's all the Deuteronomic history.
So that would be...
That's a school that writes all of that material.
So they get their own color.
Yes.
Okay.
D gets its own color, and it would, yes, be the color of all of those books. Joshua, Judges, blah, 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 Kings 1, all of that is the Deuteronomic history attributed to the school of Deuteronomy.
Yeah, so those would all be D.
Yes.
Yeah, and then after that, it would still be D, right?
Well, no, then it would be figuring out where the sources came from and when.
See, what's sort of radical, I mean, it's what's blowing my mind is that I always thought, okay, well, it's sort of divinely inspired, but now you're saying something even weirder, is that they're just trying to glue all these pieces together. And it's the friction that comes from gluing all the pieces together. That's what sort of results in some sort of something special. It's not like somebody's just sitting there and having visions. Everybody's fighting with each other, trying to get their little edits in. And that results in something special, which is even weirder to me.
Yes. That's very well said.
Yeah.
If you could write that down, and send it to me, I would appreciate it. That is.
Isn't that the whole principle of the Talmud? I mean, that's just Jewish thinking.
So the only difference is in the Talmud, they argue outright.
Yeah.
I think what David is saying is what's fascinating to learn about this is that they're arguing, but they don't say they're arguing. They're arguing, but they pretend this is one unit, literary unit, and the redactor makes it so, but leaves the seams of the arguments in place.
Also, this is baby Judaism. I mean, this is the beginning of a way of thinking by having to do this.
Sort of. Yeah, yes, but I do think there's a difference between the rabbis who are ready to own that they disagree with the redactor who's trying to put it all together in a way that makes at least some sense. That the quilt isn't ugly, the pattern becomes beautiful.
So a quick question. When did the documentary Hypotheses, when was it created?
So it's in Germany. I want to say early 1800s, late 1700s, early 1800s, Wellhausen, all those people start noticing enough of these differences to start pulling out threads, of these don't sound the same. They talk very different. Their agenda is very different. And they start to really look critically at those sources. All right. So notice nothing. Do you see anything about Sukkot? Here, building Sukkot. Do you see anything about the 4 species? Anything? Not in Exodus? Not in, what did I just read? Not in Exodus? Not in Numbers? What did we read in Leviticus? Did we read anything about building booths in Leviticus? Just saying. But what do we all assume? That it's there. Look at Ezra. Okay, and I wrote them down because I knew somebody would ask. Ezra is 440 to 300, somewhere in there. We can't exactly date some of these things because they didn't have, TV to tell us, oh, look, it happened on that day. Ezra is somewhere between 440 and 300. Okay, that's what we're looking at now. Then they celebrated the Festival of Tabernacles, as it is written, so Chag HaSukkot, with its daily burnt offerings in the proper quantities on each day as prescribed for it.
There you go.
This is Ezra, so we're talking about possibly as late as 300 BCE. Do you understand how late that is? What does Ezra say about this festival? Remember, Ezra and Nehemiah bring the Jews back from exile. They are building the community that came back from the Babylonian exile. What does Ezra the priest know about Chag HaSukkot? They celebrated the festival with its daily burnt offerings in the proper quantities. P. Ezra knows P. Does Ezra say anything about building Sukkot? No. Let's look at Numbers. You shall offer, right, to God at the stated times in addition to your votive and freewill offerings. The offer. Why did I put this here? Not sure. All right. So 1 Kings. So this is about Solomon putting the celebration of the consecration of his temple. What do you call that when you celebrate the temple opening? Huh?
Founding? I don't know.
No.
Fundraising, right?
The dedication of the first temple built by Solomon. He puts it at the 7th month at this time, at this festival. They gathered before the king, right, Solomon, at the feast in the month of Etanim, which is what it was called then, in the 7th month. That's it. All right. Then we get a bunch of sacrifices from 2 Chronicles about this same event. Trumpets, blah, blah, blah. Offerings, blah, blah, blah. The bronze altar, meal offerings, fat offerings, a feast for 7 days. On the 8th day, they held a solemn gathering. They observed the dedication of the altar 7 days and the feast 7 days. Anything about Sukkot? Nope. Looks like Ezekiel. When's Ezekiel? I wrote it down for you. Ezekiel 592 to 570 BCE. So too, during the festival of the 7th month for 7 days from the 15th day on, you shall provide the same sin offerings, burnt offerings, meal offerings, and oil. So in the 500s BCE, does Ezekiel know anything? The prophet know anything about? Nope. The only thing we get is this business in right now, Leviticus. This is the only place we get it. And what do we get? Mark on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the yield of your land, you shall observe the festival to God for 7 days, a complete rest on the 1st day and on the 8th day. Okay, we've heard that 7 million times. Oh, here's something. On the 1st day, you shall take the product of hadar trees, branches of palm trees, boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook. And you shall rejoice before God 7 days. You shall observe it as a festival of God for 7 days, blah, 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 blah. What are they supposed to do? Take trees and rejoice. That's Sukkot. Take trees, these ones, and rejoice. Huh?
Doesn't mean there weren't sukkahs there, though.
Exactly right. It doesn't mean there weren't, but what does it tell us? That the establishment has nothing to do with it. It is not a part of the established cultic practice bichlal at all. At all. Is that what you would assume? I didn't assume that. I assumed, well, of course, because and then they had it in. Probably they were hot in the fields and they had to have these booths. And then it gets revalued and it gets, reconstructed. Okay, that may be true that all of that's happening. It did not occur to me that the Israelites were not all together with the priests and everybody celebrating Chag HaSukkot. The priests know nothing about this and they don't care. No Sukkot. Yes, okay, but there's no Sukkot. There are no Sukkot here. Even here in Leviticus. Take some trees and rejoice. Okay. We're not sure. But it gets traced back to, and I didn't try to even try this with y'all, the origins of Sukkot, but a Ugaritic New Year's festival. So we'll do that another time. So possibly, we're not sure, but possibly these booths that they had during the time of harvest to keep them out of the sun, to keep the produce safe as well. Okay. Here's Nehemiah. When's Nehemiah? 445 to 433. On the 2nd day, the heads of the clans of all the people and the priests and the Levites gathered to Ezra, the scribe, to study the word of the teaching, meaning the Torah, meaning the people did not know the Torah. The people didn't read. They did not know the Torah. They certainly didn't know much about P because that was going on in a private elite circle. The people gather with Ezra and Nehemiah because Ezra and Nehemiah have been told, get your people in line. Have them live under the law of their God. Well, to do that, they're going to have to know the law. So they hear the teaching. They found written in the teaching that God had commanded Moses that the Israelites must dwell in booths during the festival of the 7th month, and that they must announce and proclaim throughout all their towns, go out to the mountains and bring leafy branches of what? Olive trees, pine trees, myrtles, and palms. Is that the list that we had in Leviticus? No. No. It's not the list we had in Leviticus. Not even the right list. It's a whole different thing. So what did it say in Leviticus? Go out and get these things and do what? Rejoice before the Lord. What did they do? They got a whole bunch of other stuff that's not in Leviticus. And what did they do with it? They made booths out of it. So there is clearly not an understanding at Nehemiah about what the heck is going on. Nehemiah thinks these people think they're supposed to go get this stuff and make booths out of it. That's not even how we practice. We don't understand it that way, right? We don't do it that way. And where did they make the booths? In the courtyards of the house of God, in the square of the water gate, and in the square of the Ephraim gate. The whole community that returned from the captivity made booths and dwelt in the booths. The Israelites, here we go, people, listen up, had not done so from the days of Joshua, son of Nun. The people had not done so since the conquest. And do you think they had it? Do you think they were in touch with the people from the conquest? They're making an assumption that it happened at the conquest. They don't have telegrams from people from the conquest going, by the way, we made booths. Wait, they don't know that. They're making an assumption because it's somewhere, so it must have been at some point. No indication that that was part of Sukkot. And there was very great rejoicing. He read from the scroll of the teaching each day from the first day to last. They celebrated the festival 7 days. And of course, a solemn gathering on the 8th, right? All right. We get a source from D, nothing about booths. All right. Now here's what's going to blow your mind. Here's what's going to blow your mind. The Levites and the priests. Now this is Nehemiah. How late is Nehemiah? 400s. 5th century BCE. 5th century BCE. The Levites and the priests were listed by heads of clans in the days of Eliashiv, Yoada, Yohanan, and Yadwa, down to the reign of Darius the Persian. What does this tell you? This tells you Nehemiah is written after Darius the Persian. That is very late. It is very late. So, Dr. Elizabeth Freed says it must be concluded that the customs of the holiday were not set and that the Torah itself was not set, even by the time of the writing of Ezra and Nehemiah. This is quite startling. Since the books of Ezra and Nehemiah is dated very late, right? She's pointing this out. I took from her. She points out this list, right? Therefore, it must have been finalized during the Hellenistic period, i.e., after the conquest of Alexander the Great in 330, perhaps in the early Ptolemaic period. Thus, by the end of Persian rule, the Torah was still not fixed and its sources still not combined. Right? Right? All right. Let's look at this, a piece from this article that I'll wrap it up quickly. I know we're at time. Throughout the 3rd century, Judea, and this was complete new learning for me. Really, I mean, I'm sure I heard some of it in rabbinical school, but like whatever. Throughout the 3rd century, Judea was under the control of the Ptolemies, a Macedonian dynasty founded by Ptolemy I, who had served under Alexander the Great and who seized Egypt following the death of the famed Hellenistic conqueror in 323. So Alexander has Egypt and the area, right? Then Ptolemy I takes it after Alexander's death. Ptolemy's son and successor, Ptolemy II Philadelphus, is known to have instituted significant legal reforms around the year 275 BCE. Separate courts were established for different ethnic groups, with certain courts set up to hear cases of Greek-speaking parties and others for native Egyptians, each according to their own laws. The Judeans living under Ptolemaic rule would also have required a set of laws under which they were to be governed. It may have been precisely these reforms that played a significant role in recharacterizing the Pentateuch as the normatively binding prescriptive law of the Judeans. If this is correct, we may speculate that Judaism itself might have been born out of the Ptolemaic court reforms of the early 3rd century. Boom! Double boom! And I'm not going to go into it, but this other scholar, you can look at it on your sheet, says it might have been as late as the Hasmonean dynasty after Ptolemy, that the Hasmoneans needed some way to rule. They now took, remember, Hanukkah, They take control. They now have sovereignty in the land of Israel. They need a declaration of independence. They need a constitution. So they turn to the Pentateuch to be their new founding set of laws for the new independent state. Okay.
So why do we date our calendar the way we do? 5,000
from creation.
Oh, from Greece.
From creation.
Oh, creation.
So the rabbis look at the Torah, and if there's this many generations, a generation is this many years, they guesstimate something that's really wrong.
Thing is so silly.
What thing is silly?
The whole thing.
What whole thing? Oh my God. Well, I'm going to move out of the way because lightning is coming from the sky right now.
I think it's logical in that, it's survival. It's about survival. It's not about following God. It's not about following the priests or the culture. It's like, how do we survive? So it's kind of interesting and exciting to me.
I agree.
But I hear a but coming.
I think that's true. And what it makes me think about is you sometimes think about, Lubavitchers, they're just basing their practices on something from, the 1800s. And that's just a little bit earlier. All of these practices are just from 3rd century BCE. That's what's so silly. The rabbi, it's a bunch of people writing stuff over centuries, and we have to parse are we doing it right? Is your sukkah have, 3 walls? If it does, that's not right. That we take it so seriously. It's a fun game for the rabbis to read and try to guess what it might mean now. But it's
so let's be clear about what's silly. So what I hear you saying is there is an approach to taking any prescription in Torah so seriously because it is absolute truth given from the mouth of God or Sinai or whatever, or divinely inspired, whatever you want to say. Like when you really do something like this shiur, this class, it's like, well, wait, who, when, nuh-uh. Not the priest. No, not the priest. There's nothing about, and so that kind of machmir, we have to do it this way. And there's no deviating from to the right or the left. First of all, your premise is wrong that's how it was done even, right? So that I get as kind of silliness. That I understand. The taking of what our people have chosen to save as what they're attached to and what they're ready to reconstruct, for me, remains an ongoing, very important, critical, central project to the Jewish people. And our job is to know enough to be able to do that for our time. And for us to say, does Sukkot still mean something? Like you've heard me complain about that. I was going to use another word, complain about this for how many years? And finally, y'all forced me to say to the programming committee meeting, how about we just have a sukkah bash? We just have a party, because y'all have heard me complain about it for how long, about wanting to reconstruct Sukkot, not just ignore it because we're all tired of going to shul. So how do we reconstruct it? And we did. And you know what? 300 people came last year. 300 people came to our first sukkah bash because we were right. People do want a party. We just never gave them one. We said, come do this, come do that, come do, which is fine. But is that really what people want after the drama of the high holidays? No, what they wanted was exactly what they had in ancient times, a big party. Grab that stuff and rejoice before the Lord. And that is what we did. That is, to me, the opposite of silly. That is the point, is to figure out how do we, as a community of intention, lean into the roots of stuff that worked for our people in the past and bring it forward. And what doesn't work, fine. Let it, go by the wayside. Let it get edited out, if you will. But that continuity is something that gives my life great shape and meaning, that I am in the stream of folks who have been doing this. We all are. I don't mean me as a rabbi. I mean me as a human, as a Jew, that we have been doing this for thousands of years. And if we can be honest about that and say it's always been reconstructed. We are simply doing the same thing we have always done, which is how we survived and kept the whole thing vibrant and meaningful. And what's the point if it's not, right? That if I'm a part of that project, sign me up. What's more important than that?
Sorry, no, I mean, I think it was last week that there was this big discussion about, or maybe 2 weeks ago, about chosenness and the sort of, and it seemed at the time sort of passive, like you're chosen. With this interpretation, it's like we sort of chose ourselves and worked really hard at choosing ourselves. It's not. Yeah, it's a different.
And it took a lot of. There was a lot of infighting and a lot of tensions and a lot of whatever. I think H is critical. I don't really care about observance of a lot of stuff without H's perspective. Like my observance of Yom Kippur should make me somebody who then does something out in the world for the people who don't have enough to eat. It shouldn't just be a fast. Isaiah's right. Who cares our fasting? Who cares? Unless it really does help make me the kind of person who's going to do a little more this year to address the stuff that I can impact. I can't impact everything, obviously, but the things I can. And that's the point of these observances, right? Is to figure out how to bring us together, how to bring us in touch with that which is bigger than us and what that demands of us. If we take holiness seriously as now having an ethical and moral component, which post H, we all should, I think, then that's the most important project. What else should we be about as the Jews? Bagels?
That's number 2.
That's number 2.
Why not?
Lisa's muffins. All right. So anyway, so thank you for your patience and sitting through what I know was a difficult shiur, but what I want you to really take from it again is not remembering the dates and the sources or whatever. To take from it kind of what Laura took from it, but with a different outcome, I hope. And that is that there is anyone who wants to tell you this is how it was from Sinai forward is full of you know what. And you now have had exposure to the sources themselves that tell you that's just not true.
And you're finding.
Good.
You brought us up to date.
Well, thank you, Sarah. That is a huge compliment and is the point of everything we're doing here. Thank you. All right, Daphna, you want to say something? And then we're going to make a mishaberach. Unmute, Daphna. לא שומעים, חמודה.
אוקיי, עכשיו שומעים אותי?
כן, בטח.
Okay, תודה. Sorry, I know it's the last 30 seconds of the class and I have all these big questions swirling in my mind. This was a great shiur. Toda rabba. But I'm wondering, because along the lines of what the last person said about silliness, it seems like there's a big contrast between the Jews who are dogmatic and who just read everything literally and say this came from Moshe and we've been doing this for 5,000 years, versus people who actually study the text like we just did today and see that there are inconsistencies, variations, etc. So how do the more dogmatic Jews handle this material?
So what they would say is it all came down on Sinai, and the piece in Leviticus about, taking branches, well, that came down on Sinai too. It all came down at the same time. Exodus doesn't need to talk about it because it's in Leviticus. It doesn't mean Exodus doesn't know about it. It just means it didn't have to say it there. It said it in Leviticus. God doesn't need to say it 3 times. Of course, God says other things 4 times then, but whatever.
Like multiple ways to observe Sukkot?
Yes. So now that we don't have a temple, we can't do all the offerings. We can't do the sacrifices. Fine. But what we can do is take our leafy boughs and make Sukkot, that we're supposed to dwell in Sukkot, and we're take our leafy boughs and do whatever. The rabbis then decide, what does that mean? Take them. The rabbis decide when you take all 4 of them together and they're all touching, you have fulfilled the mitzvah. That's why we start with the pitom down, say the bracha, and then turn the pitom up. Because once the pitom's up, you fulfill the commandment of taking the species.
But for example, you had 4 different species listed, and then in another text there were different species listed. So what do they do with all of that? Do they say
Nehemiah just got it wrong. He had the wrong list. Nehemiah got it wrong. Or they had another tradition on top of the original one, but God forbid. I mean, the original is the original. That's God's word, right? And they find lots of creative ways to harmonize these things. But for the most part, the Nehemiah is not the Torah. It's not Doraita.
I see.
It's
Okay.
Doraita that they're going to go back to, right? Always Doraita takes precedence and trumps everything else.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.